What's up, everybody? Just coming to you today to announce my new channel. I'm going to be doing book reviews here on this YouTube channel. Later on in the video, I'm actually going to dive into my first book review, which is a review of Shoe Dog by Phil Knight. But for the first couple minutes here, I just wanted to talk about what I'm going to be doing with this channel and why I kind of started it, as well as, what you could get from it. So I'm an engineering student in UF in my third year there, and I've been doing pretty well, and I just wanted to say that reading has been a huge part of my success, and because of that I wanted to kind of do some reviews of books so that I could possibly generate some more interest in books, and then eventually more interest in myself and my channel and stuff. The first reason I wanted to kind of do this channel is for my own personal learning, completely selfish. Summarizing and reviewing and talking about these books is going to force me to learn them and know them better. And I think reading is really powerful. But even though I read a lot, sometimes I'll, totally forget what I read in the book. I'll reread it and be like, oh, this is great, this is great. This is going to force me to learn those books better. And then secondly, doing this is going to help me kind of generate my own, I'm providing value to you guys, and, as good as it is. But I'm going to be able to generate some attention, hopefully, in the long term. And in the future, when I want to start my own business and stuff, people will see, oh, this guy's been putting out content and for free and stuff for a very long period of time, and hopefully that'll help me with my business and stuff like that. And then thirdly, obviously, is try and help you guys. I think reading is powerful, and I think that as I review and I go over books, you're gonna see, oh, maybe I want to read this, maybe I don't want to read this, but it's still a really great way to kind of get an idea, get someone's opinion on a book, and then hopefully kind of decide if you want to read it and you want to go for it. All in all, I think that this could be something good and fun for myself, but for the most part, it's just going to be, fun and enjoyable. I've always wanted to start a YouTube channel, so I just want to kind of have fun here. I'm not going to spend a huge amount of time editing the videos. It's mostly just going to be talking about the book and then, cutting out some terrible stuff or whatever. But it's mostly just me bringing some content to you guys. It's going to be summaries of the books and then reviews. And then hopefully in the future, I'm going to do some other stuff as far as talking about how I have read so much, or tips and tricks to read faster, to get more out of your reading, and then kind of understand the importance of reading and why it can be useful and can be great. So I'll do videos on all that different stuff, but for the most part, it's just going to be the reviews of the books. So without further ado, we're going to jump right into the first book. So, the summary of Shoe Dog. Shoe Dog is the autobiography of Phil Knight. Phil Knight's the founder of Nike. And while it is, in the title, it's specifically called the memoir, because it is not necessarily an autobiography. It doesn't run from birth to death. I would say 90% of the book is focused on the few years, about a 10-year, maybe 15 or 20-year span from right before he founded his first company, Blue Ribbon, which actually eventually turned into Nike. So it's about the birth of Nike, but it's also an autobiography. I'd say it's about 2/3 about him as a person, 1/3 about Nike, although those two are very interrelated because for a long time, he was Nike. It starts out a few years after he graduated. So he went to the University of Oregon, ran track, went to Stanford Business School, and then headed into the military. The book starts after the military when he moved back in with his family. He's questioning what he wants to do with life, and he decides to go on a trip around the world. He goes first to Hawaii, lands in Hawaii as a failed salesman in Hawaii, which is a little ironic. The founder of Nike couldn't cut it as a salesman. Then he flew to Japan next and decided to try a business idea that he had in college, and this is where he actually starts his first company. Not while he's living in Japan, but he gets the idea started, talks to a Japanese company, and the idea is that they will import shoes to America and he will sell them in America. There's a lot of issues, it being not too long after World War II, so no one else had tried this. He gave it a try, and the shoes, they said yes. They were going to send the shoes to Oregon, where he's from. He continued traveling the world, went around a lot of Asia, Europe, and had a good trip, learned a lot of experiences, headed back to America, and that's where he started Blue Ribbon. So initially it started out of his parents' living room. He was just selling shoes. Then he ended up, as it started to get a little bit bigger, he ended up partnering with his coach from Oregon. his track coach, who at that time was already well known in the running community and relatively famous. So this partnership kind of boosted Blue Ribbon to the next level, and he started selling a little more aggressively. At this point, on one of his trips back to Japan, he met this girl, and the beginning of the book describes him. He's very shy, very introverted. When the book starts, he's never done drugs, he's never really partied, and he's never been in a really serious relationship, and he's still a virgin. So kind of crazy. The man's very introverted, and although he's obviously incredibly smart and a great athlete, it's cool to see someone who's very, very normal person in a way. Just, is the person who ends up building Nike. But he meets this girl while he's in Japan, and they start dating. She comes back, she's very worldly. Her parents are very rich over on the East Coast, and so they start talking. Eventually she breaks up with him because he's not sophisticated enough for her. His family doesn't come from enough money, and it really breaks his heart. And you can see this dark place, this sadness. Doesn't come out of his room for 2 weeks. He's still living with his parents at this time. Eventually it's his mom who kind of kicks his butt, gets him going, gets him back working with Blue Ribbon. So then Blue Ribbon begins to grow, but he decides that he needs to actually get a job on his own because he's funneling all the money back into his company. So he gets in a job as an accountant, begins working a little bit as an accountant, really likes it. He's traveling with a close friend, and basically he's up all the time because he's working during the day as an accountant. He's doing a lot of trips, and his friend or his boss is a heavy drinker and kind of forces him to drink as well. So, and then of course he's running Blue Ribbon as well, importing shoes that's starting to grow. He gets a couple people under him, a couple really powerful, influential sales people who start to grow the company. So then he ends up getting a little more distribution rights, opens a store on the West Coast and the East Coast, and Blue Ribbon begins to grow. And over the next few years, it transforms into a really big company, up to, not a huge company, so he gets up to about 30 people on his company. He transitions to teaching accounting and then eventually going full-time with Blue Ribbon. While he's teaching accounting, he meets a student and they end up falling in love. He marries her, and that is still his wife to this day. So he then, Blue Ribbon's gotten to about 30 employees. They're doing well, but even though they're profiting about $5 million a year in sales, or that's the projected one for the next year at this point, he's still having a lot of trouble because he's pumping all the money back into the company, focusing on growth. He ends up having a falling out with his banker, which then causes a falling out with his distributor, and he gets in a tough spot and basically decides that they're going to go out on their own. So the distributor cuts them off, the bank cuts them off, and they, at this point, have already got some shoes that they've been working on and stuff, and so this is when they start their own thing, and they start Nike. He's got to come up with a new name. He was between, I believe it was Cougar, Dimension 6, and one of his vice presidents actually had a dream, and the name Nike came to him, so he kind of threw it in at the last minute. He's like, hey, this name, I was obviously thinking about it, this name just popped up in a dream. And Phil Knight had actually gone to Greece, Parthenon, and Athena, who of Nike is Athena's kind of sidekick. And Nike is the goddess of victory, Athena being the goddess of war and wisdom. And so Phil's like, he kind of makes, he's really bad at making decisions in the moment. And so he goes, he picks up the phone, he's got to call his distributors and tell them what the name is, and he goes, Nike, decides it on the moment. And then the swoosh, interestingly enough, also comes from a weird kind of story. There's a graphic design student at a small college nearby where they're headquartered in Oregon, and they end up paying her some money. Hey, just come up with a design, because he wasn't big on advertising. He didn't really have any full-time graphic design people. And so she came up with some ideas. They kind of picked the swoosh. She paid her $35, which at the time was a fine amount of money, totally normal. She was fine with that. But, obviously it grows into this huge, massive global symbol that's so recognizable. And the person who created it was paid $35 in the 70s. So, maybe a few $100s today at most. So definitely not a lot. But at this point, he goes out with Nike for a few years. They're growing really well, and he's doing well. They end up getting in a fight with U.S. Customs, and it's not really a fight directly with Customs. Some other companies, there's a trade law that only allows importers to undercut American-made goods by a certain amount. And so some of his competitors basically jack up their prices on a certain line of shoes that's similar to Nike's, just so that they can say, hey, he's undercutting this law. And so he gets a bill from the US government for $25 million, which at this point he can't pay that. That's about all the year's revenue. So they fight it, and for the first time he kind of uses advertising and stuff. And so even though this fight ends up, they whittle it down to $9 million that he pays in settlement, it ends up really being a huge publicity stunt for Nike, because it's like the small company fighting against the big bad government. And in a similar time, he's starting to recruit athletes to be Nike, wear Nikes when they're playing. He starts to get some colleges and stuff, but one of his biggest guys is this runner who used to run at Oregon State and is now running for the Olympics. And just as that guy's about to take off, and actually he does not poorly in the Olympics, but not perfect. And then just as he's about to take off the next year, that guy actually passes away. So that hits everybody at Nike really hard. But they kind of recover from it. And then the next year, they actually have, they have 3 people in Nikes who place first, second, and third in the Olympics. So this is huge for them. And at this point, Nike is really big. It's generating a lot of revenue. They just kind of won, even though they had to settle, they kind of won the case against the US government. And he makes the decision to finally go public with Nike. And he wanted to hold on to control so he could kind of hold on to the vision. And this is what everyone else at the company kind of agreed with as well, is to, we want to keep control. We want to be able to dedicate our vision and the mission that we started this company, which is kind of to make running, it was a company for runners, for athletes. It wasn't to make a ton of money. These people were at a point where they could take the company public and all become millionaires, and they weren't. He was still living paycheck to paycheck, pumping all the money back into Nike. And then he finally made the decision that for the long-term stability of Nike, to go public and basically keep back some shares, so that they called them the butt faces. They were kind of the founding group of Nike, the top guys. And there was just this rowdy, crazy bunch. And they kept back 60% of the shares, of which Phil kept the majority, so that, because they weren't really worried about money, that wasn't their thing. They wanted to make sure that there would not be any power struggles. So he kept, I believe it was 62% of the 30. So he was still the by large majority shareholder. And when it went public, kind of overnight, they all became millionaires. All the different guys were worth between $5 and $7 million, and he was worth, I believe it was about $190 million, Phil was. And so, he never was doing it for the money, but it was kind of obviously a huge accomplishment. He was now finally stable and safe. And then that's towards the end of the book, and then the book kind of summarizes with him talking about these moments that he had with these players. And he talks about the passing of his son, which is a tough, tragic event for him, obviously. But he talks about how he gets to share these moments with these players. Like he talks about how when LeBron James won his first championships, he ran over, and Phil Knight was one of the first people he hugged, and he said, "We did it." So Phil's like, "We?" I was, you're shitting, and LeBron was like, "Thanks for believing in me." And he's talking, you're great. But the point is, and Tiger Woods and all these other players, Bo Jackson, Herschel Walker, who all have been top Nike athletes, he got to have these connections, and for him, that's what he kind of summarizes in the book with saying it. I never really knew exactly what it was about. In the first chapter, he talks about how he wants to play. He never wants to work. He wants to play. So that's why he actually started the company, because for him, this was fun. It was play. But he summarizes on that connections was what it was really about. He talks about the different connections he's had throughout his life. Not connections in a business sense, although that was obviously clearly really important to him, having the track coach from Oregon and these people he met in Japan working with his business was one of the reasons it was successful. But human connections on a deep, good level, and to connect with these amazing people, that's what made it all worth it. So that was the summary of Shoe Dog. Now I'm going to dive into the next section, which are the key takeaways, to kind of the things that were most impactful and meaningful to me, and the things that you guys just would and should get from the book, whether you decide to read it or you're just using this video as a replacement for reading it. So the biggest one, like I mentioned before, was connecting to people. That's what he definitely thought it was all about. And not only in business, it was important. It was big having the coach from Oregon and having all these different good people. He had some really good lawyers, some really good accountants, and some people that he knew, especially from being a collegiate athlete and going to these top schools, because he wasn't college dropout or high school dropout to start this company. He went to a top state school and then a top business school, and that clearly helped him throughout his career. But even more so than that, it was the human connections that are what made it important. He got to be friends with the Buffetts and the Gates and Tiger Woods and all these just amazing athletes. And I would say the next big one is he definitely did whatever it took. There were times when people would ask him questions that if he said no to, it was going to mean the end of Nike. But if he said yes to, he was lying. And he would say yes, and then he would put himself in a position to where he would do it. So for example, he went to Japan and they were like, what's the name of your company? He didn't have a name, he didn't have anything, he didn't have a company. He was just thinking this idea. But he was like, Blue Ribbon. Just came up with it on the fly. Like, this is my company, we have a company. Sure, I represent Blue Ribbon. And then he went back and he started Blue Ribbon. And then there was another time when they wanted to cut him off. His supplier wanted to cut him off. And this was back when in Blue Ribbon, and they were like, we want someone with a distributor on the East Coast. He's like, what are you talking about? We have a distributor on the East Coast. He didn't at the time, but he went back and he immediately started a store on the East Coast, and one of those people that he connected with well, a friend of his who'd been working in the business for a while, moved to the East Coast, started up there in Boston, actually, where the Boston Marathon was. And now these things did come back to bite him in the ass. He was actually sued in a court case, and he ended up winning, but it was very tough, and it was one of the darkest points in the book, where as he was trying to break and start Nike, the import company ended up suing him, and he also countersued for damages, and he ended up winning. God, I think it was $400,000 out of it. So it turned out well, but he said it was just terrible because these lies that he had told came back up. But he was also like, I would have done it again because it's what I had to do to save Nike. Or I guess it was Blue Ribbon at the time, to save Blue Ribbon, save his company, to save his dream. It was his life. So to do whatever it takes. And then another thing that I thought was interesting is he wasn't, of course he was a special person. I think every person is unique and special, but I saw an interview with Mark Cuban, and he talks about how he started a company at 9 and he had all these companies, and I'm just like, that's not me. I could never do that. That's not how I am. But seeing this book, I connected with him. He wasn't a special person, but he did special things. He wasn't some amazing salesperson, some naturally gifted negotiator. He was a pretty normal dude, and he didn't do anything that incredibly well, but he worked his ass off. He never gave up on Nike, or he never gave up on his dream. He never gave up on Blue Ribbon, and that eventually became Nike. And then he is where he is today, multi-billionaire, friends with all these amazing people, has lived a truly amazing life. And there were so many times where just the littlest thing could have stopped him. And it wasn't because he was the best negotiator, or salesperson, or businessman. It was because he worked his ass off, and he kept trying. He just pursued this dream, even though there were times when everyone around him was telling him not to. So that was one of the biggest takeaways for me, is anybody can do it. There were a few times I was reading the book where I was like, this guy started Nike, like when this girl broke his heart towards the beginning, and he was just holed up in his room at his parents' house, 25 years old, Stanford MBA, and she was just heartbroken. And it's very, relatable, and you can kind of empathize with that, because, it's something we all go through. And to see that, Phil Knight went through it too, and he didn't just shrug it off and keep going. That was one of the biggest takeaways for me. And then, he also was a lot about doing what you loved. And he talked about play, like I mentioned, that playing was important, and it should always be fun, and it's not about the money. Warren Buffett has a a quote about the scoreboard. You know, the players who do well aren't the ones who are sitting there watching the scoreboard. They're the ones who are just going hard and playing. And that's how it should be in life. You should find something, and that's clearly a big part of what he pushes in this book, is finding what you love, doing what you love, and never giving up on it. And then, so that's the takeaway section. Those are the main things that I took away were do whatever it takes, connections, the playing, doing what you love, and you know, that he wasn't really a special person, but he took special action. So those are the takeaways. The next section we're going to dive into is an actual review of the book itself. So the review, this is kind of, you know, how good was this book in my opinion. First of all, it was very good. It came very highly recommended. I think it was a post that Elon Musk recommends it, and that's when I saw it. I was like, you know, I'll go for it. I'll give it a shot. I haven't read this book. And at first it was a bit slow, you know, and I think that's because I come from reading a lot more purely self-development books that just jump straight in to stories that give clear points and then they explain the points. And this book started out with, you know, the beginning of the guy's life. But it, well, actually it didn't start out with the beginning of his life. You know, it started once he was close to starting his company, and that is actually a really good thing for me. I wouldn't have wanted to hear too much about his childhood and stuff, and I'm glad they didn't spend so much time on once he achieved his success. You know, it was the, you know, chapter each kind of, you know, oh, this was the beginning of his life, this was the end of his life, but this is what you care about, you know, starting Nike, starting Blue Ribbon in Nike. And it was a good story. It was a well-told story. He did a very good job, and seeing it from his perspective, you know, his thoughts, his mind as the person who did it, was great. I like autobiographies a lot more than I enjoy biographies because there's no speculation about what he was thinking, and I'd rather know. You know, why did he do this? Well, he can tell you why. And this book did a very good job of telling the story and also bringing along those points and those ideas. Yes, you have to think, and you have to pull the idea of, well, he enjoyed play, he enjoyed connection. You have to pull the takeaways out, but they're not difficult to find. And that's one thing the human mind does very well naturally, is take stories and pull the meaning out of them. And this book did a very good job of making those stories good and interesting and very meaningful and full of lessons. And another thing it did really well was the stories were interesting. You know, like I was saying, the stories are captivating. Like a story about the swoosh, and so many stories about negotiations, and stories about his traveling. It was an engaging book. It kept me interested the whole time. Actually, I listened to most of my books, or I'd be holding up the book and showing it, but I don't have a paper copy. I just have my journal notes here, and of course my drink. But I listened to the book, and it was never one where I was like, oh man, I've got to rewind, because I got distracted. I was fully focused on it the entire time. Even when I was doing other things like cleaning, or actually I was playing some Assassin's Creed with the volume off on Assassin's Creed and listening, but I can, you know, I remember everything, and I know everything that happened. And that's with some books that aren't as good when you're listening, because it is more passive. I'll zone out, and this never happened. It kept me engaged and interested the whole time. Also, I think it did a really good job of blending his life and Nike. You know, it's the autobiography of Phil Knight, but it's also the autobiography of Nike. And because, yes, they're such enmeshed characters, and you wouldn't care about him if he hadn't started Nike, and Nike wouldn't be a thing without him, so they are almost one and the same. It does a good job of it's not just focused on Nike. It's not just focused on him. It doesn't spend as much time on his personal life, although it touches on it enough for you to get a really good understanding of who he was. And same thing with the Nike side. It doesn't talk about other people in Nike and what they did, only to a degree of, you know, how they affected him. But it does a great job of meshing the two and giving you what you want, at least what I wanted as the reader, which is, tell me about the person, tell me about what he did to create this massive, amazing thing that is Nike. It also does a good job of teaching history about the American and Japanese and the trade that was going on between them, and, you know, the history of how, you know, large businesses evolved. Like, talked a lot about he couldn't get equity because equity banks, like, you know, business loans didn't really exist at that time. You could only get it from the bank, and if you were a fast-growing company who didn't keep a lot of cash, the banks didn't like that because that's not stable. So these, you know, like Shark Tank and stuff like that didn't exist. Those type of investors didn't exist. And then there was also, you know, the history of the war, the world at that time with the wars going on, like Korea and Vietnam. You know, he was afraid of being drafted. He thought, if I get drafted, it's going to ruin my company. And that didn't end up happening, thankfully for him and for everybody who wears Nikes. And I got my Jordan shirt on here, which is, of course, a subset of Nike. But all in all, it was a great book. You know, if I I had to give it a score, let's say it was an 8.7 out of 10. Now, that's very high. I want to pull from the Barstool Pizza reviews and make it difficult to achieve a high rating, because this book was well above average. I've read worse books, but this one, it's just good story, a story that mixed both his life and Nike together, great story, and tons of things you could learn, things you could integrate in your own personal life. Whether you're an entrepreneur or whatever, you're going to learn a lot from this book. Even if you're just living your life, you have no desire to start a company, he teaches a lot about life. I mean, it's a book about life, but it's a book about someone who lived an extraordinary life. So, all around, 8.7 out of 10, great book. Next part is my actual recommendations of who should read this book. As I was saying, anybody's going to get something from it. So, I don't care where you are in life, what you're doing, why you came across this video, this will not be a waste of your time, whether you read the paperback or listen to it or whatever form you get it. Hopefully Audible will be sponsoring me in the future. But it's just a great book. Definitely recommend it for anybody, but I would recommend it very highly, first of all, if you're an entrepreneur. If you want to start businesses or you have started businesses, read the book for sure. Absolutely. It's the story of one of the greatest entrepreneurs ever, but not a great entrepreneur in the way of he was a great salesman, he was all this stuff. He was a normal person who also used his dream to start a huge company. He was very different, I feel like, than most stories. Like Mark Cuban's so different than him, in that he hadn't started 20 businesses. He wasn't just, he was less of an entrepreneur and more of a dreamer. And so, more like to Bill Gates or Steve Jobs, but I would say even less so in that those people had this visionary product they were designing. He just kind of had an idea, and it was cool, seeing him do that. I think any entrepreneur should read. And then if you're a young person and you're searching for kind of like meaning in life, you don't know what you want to do, that's what the whole freaking book is about. It's about him trying to find what he wants to do. He talks a lot about how he had this vision of not losing. You could fail, that was fine, but never quit and don't lose, because losing is when you quit, in his opinion. His mind, failure wasn't losing. He equated losing with the end, and everything for him was sports. That's where he grew up, that's who he was. And I think there's a bit of a disconnect between the sports metaphor, because sports ends at the end of the game, whereas business doesn't. Business keeps going. Business is an infinite game. I don't know if any of you guys have read the Simon Sinek's view on this, but it's great. He has a book called Infinite Games, and that I'll should review later. But he was trying to find what to him was winning, because games run out at the end and you're either the winner or the loser, but winning and losing in business is different. And you can tell that towards the end for him, winning was these connections that he built and enjoying his life and always doing what he wanted to do and never being subservient to someone else. And there was a lot of things, but if you're searching for meaning in life and you want to see that the guy who started Nike spent his whole life doing the same thing, it's refreshing, and you're like, okay, I'm not alone. And it also teaches you a lot, and you'll learn from it. And then especially if you want to start a business, and this is kind of the position I'm in, I would like to own businesses and start businesses, and I would like to be an entrepreneur, but I don't, when I watched that Mark Cuban interview that I keep referencing, it was with Patrick Bet-David, good interview, I recommend watching it, but I was like, man, I'm not like this, I'm not Mark Cuban, I haven't started businesses, I've never started a business. I actually did sell rocks one time at a baseball park, but didn't make any money and did it for a day. But I never ran a business, I'm not a great salesperson, I'm studying engineering. And when I'm reading this book, I'm like, this guy reminds me of me. He had a good education and good connections, and then he just had a dream and he went with it. And so if you're someone like this book, if you're someone who wants to own a business, wants to start a business, but something like, is it for me? Could I do it? If you find something you're passionate about, this book shows that you can not be that great. And obviously he was smart and he was hardworking and all this stuff, but it was the fact that he was passionate about what he was doing, and he didn't want a job. He didn't like that, and so he decided to kind of be a rebel and go start Nike. And like I was mentioning, anybody can read this. Anybody will gain from this. So all in all, great book. I hope that you learned a little bit from the summary. of the book, but I did not do it justice. I would go read it if you're anybody. Thanks. I just want to finalize this video by saying I'm gonna try and do this on a weekly basis, bring one video of a book review each week, and then maybe branch out and do some other stuff as well. I read about 2 books every week, so I'll just be picking, you know, and it's not like, oh, I'm reading 2 books this week, 2 books this week. They overlap, all kinds of stuff. So I'll be picking the ones I enjoy the most, reviewing them, and then I also want to do some other stuff like talking about how I read so much. You know, like I was saying, the headphones and listening is huge. I read paperback books as well, but mostly listening. What I've gained from the different books, maybe what I've gained from all of the books that I've read, and definitely at the end of the year, in December, I want to do like a yearly review. This year, for the first time, I'm keeping track of every single book I've read, and for a little bit over half the year, I should have video summaries and recordings of what, you know, summaries, what I got from them and all that. So next week, I'm going to be reviewing another book. It may be a Brene Brown book, or maybe a Simon Sinek book. Those are 2 of my favorite authors, and I've recently been reading some of their stuff. Yeah, and then I'm going to do some autobiographies. It'll mostly be self-help related stuff. That's most of what I read, a little bit of philosophy, and I've been getting more into the autobiographies and the biographies because I think that makes the storytelling better. And that's kind of what I want to do, is be able to tell the stories of these books, and hopefully you'll like it, ignite your passion about it, and then you'll go read the book. Like I said in the beginning, I think reading is really important and really powerful. It's been one of the biggest changers in my life. And I also love talking. You know, I'm kind of an extrovert, so when I don't have people to talk to, I can just talk to this screen and look at me looking back, and I've got some good lighting here, so I'm like, but so I'll be bringing another book review next week. Hopefully you liked this. If you did, you know, like and subscribe like all the real YouTubers say.